Ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors and professionals, the literary history of England flourished. There was a larger reading public created during this period, with circulation, libraries, newspapers created a demand for 3 decades, multi-volume novels, and many writers produced serialized fiction. The theatres remained popular and Drury Lane saw a change as more members of the middle class began to frequent the playhouses. Undertones of social criticism and discontentment with concurrent ideas were lurking and critical works. Historical writings, belligerent writings on industrial issues like problems of the working class, critical works on art and architecture, the art of essay writing, which was subjective in the Romantic period, into social criticism during the Victorian times. Instead of writing about their personal experiences, the essayists focused on depiction of contemporary social, religious, economic. Thomas Carlyle, Henry Newman, John Stuart Mill were among the few essayists who penned down incisive commentaries and analysis of Victorian society. John Henry Newman's, which were reflected in the Oxford movement initiated by him. His main level was Text for the Times, Thomas Carlyle, 1795 to 1880. Perhaps the most influential essayist of this time, a prolific writer, Carlyle set the agenda for rethinking issues ranging from the French Revolution to science and education. Times went on to influence all generation of thinkers and writers. Another important text and a book that revolutionized human thought was Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. Darwin, who born in 1809 and died in 1888, argued that life evolved through a process of natural selection. John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873, was one of the first men to speak on and advocate. 1822 and died in 1888, began his career as a poet but turned to prose in his later years. Arnold's criticism probably inaugurated what is now called a defense of literature. John Ruskin, 1819 to 1900, wrote on subjects as diverse as zoology and art, with modern painters being his most famous track. Walter Pater, 1839, Walter and died in 1894, just like Ruskin saw his age as decadent. However, unlike Ruskin, he turned to the Renaissance for inspiration. His the studies in the history of the Renaissance 1873 and appreciations 1889 were attempts to recast aesthetic and were instrumental in what kind of fiction was common in writing in Victorian days. The term Victorian novel does not confine to a particular school of thought with a set of novelists pondering over common themes. Instead, it gives us a panoramic view of the life of the time. It is a social document of great value and significance. In its variety of matter and treatment, is the index of the sided interest and conflicting elements of the Victorian age. Thus, we have novels of the sea and of military life, and so on. Sometimes these novels go beyond British geographic locations, as in the fiction which is concerned with Irish life or Scottish life, or even about life in other European countries. Charles Dickens, who born in 1812 and died in 1870, became a household name when Pickwick Papers was published in 1837. His irresistible humor combined with his elaborate descriptive power and the astonishing vitality of his characters made him popular. His other works include A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, and Our Mutual Friend. William Makepeace Thackeray, who born in 1811 and died in 1863, was essentially a social satirist, a realist. His popular works are Vanity Fair and The History of Henry Esmond. The novel was thus humanitarian in the hands of Dickens and satiric in the hands of Thackeray, in the hands of Mary Ann Evans or Marian Evans, known by her name George Eliot. George Eliot, who born in 1819 and died in 1880, it became moral and philosophical. In her novel Romola, a tale of the Renaissance in Florence, she made an excursion into the past. However, she was her best in works like Adam Bede, The Mill on the Floss, Silas Marner, and Middlemarch. Another influential novelist is Thomas Hardy, who born in 1840 and died in 1928. Driven by a famously tragic in The Return of the Return of the Native, The Mayor of Casterbridge, The Woodlanders, and Jude the Obscure. Hardy is a writer of rather gloomy, tragic novels. Wilkie Collins, who born in 1824 and died in 1889, was a popular novelist who tried to cater to the taste of Victorian public at a time when it was fed up with the social reform and propaganda novels. His prominent works are The Woman in White and The Moonstone. Anthony Trollope, who born in 1875 and died in 1882, is the novelist of the middle and the upper middle classes. With urban militarity and shrewd observation, he presents an accurate, detailed picture of their quit and uneven. His important works include The Warden, Barchester Towers, and Dr. Thorne's Love Peacocks, 1785. Thorne's Love Peacocks, 1785 to 1866, works from a comic dramatization of the intellectual notions of his age. Headlong Hall, Nightmare Abbey, and Clontechet Castle are among his popular novels. The Victorian age is also a time when women novelists began to carve out a place for themselves. Elizabeth Gaskell, the Bronte sisters, and George Eliot are some of the most significant women writers of this time. Elizabeth Gaskell's 1870-65 novels revolved around the themes of important improvement of working conditions of laborers and workers in factories and industries, thus making her novels a major tool in bringing social reform like North and South and Mary Burton, Charlotte, Emily and Anne Bronte have made notable contribution to the English novel during the early part of the Victorian era. Their chief novels are Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, Anne Bronte's Agnes Way. The three sisters represent the stormy sisterhood, that is, the passion in English fiction. They imparted the romantic note of imagination and passion of English novels. Though in 1880s, adventure, fantasy and mystery novels were quite popular, most of the novelists still confined themselves to realist themes. In the beginning of the literary terms, science fiction is a broad genre of fiction that is focused on existing or future scientific and technological theories and the speculations surrounding them. The coining of the term science fiction is usually attributed to American publisher Hugo Gernsback. However, the founder of this genre is believed to be the Victorian author H.G. Wells. Besides social and sociological fiction, Wells also wrote science fiction sometimes also called scientific romances. Scientific romances are the earliest books of fiction. They were all produced between 1895 and 1908 and included The Time Machine, The Wonderful Visit, The Island of Morio, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, When the Sleeper Wakes, The First Man on the Moon, The Food of the Gods, and The War in the Air. These are all thrilling stories of scientific marvels. The stories are designed to show the potentialities of science. Some of these stories are based on familiar facts such as Man on the Moon. In theory, nothing is impossible in science fiction. The War of the Worlds is a possibility because the flying saucers, as has been suggested in the book, may be the reconnaissance plans of the Martians. Space has been conquered. Conquest of time may follow. That is the theme of The Time Machine, the finest of Wells' imaginative creation, in which the time machine as a sort of motorbike on which you could travel back to the past and forward into the future. Science fiction's popularity has increased manifold over the years and is now divided into subgenres like steampunk, time travel, alternate history, dystopic fiction. In the Victorian age, we have studied different poets, novelists, and dramatists. Victorian novel. What are the features of these novels? How these novels were different from the Elizabethan writings of the novels? The 18th century saw the rise and growth of the English novel. The rise and growth of the English novel. How it is being said, the rise and growth of the English novel, because this century was the starting period of the spreading of industrialization. In 19th and 20th century period, we study this was the time of revolutionary industrialization period. Henry Fielding, Lawrence Stern, Eliza Haywood, Francis Bernays and others laid the foundation for a variety of genres and forms, even as they created an audience for longer prose narratives in an age of increasing literacy. The Victorian age was marked by a massive expansion of the novel in terms of the kinds of writing as well as readership. Many kinds of genres were being published and consumed: utopian fiction, school tales, mystery novels, historical novels, industrial novels, social problem novels, adventure tales, oriental tales, and moral stories, among others. Readership loomed, especially with an increasing demand for fiction from the middle classes. The style ranged from realism to fantasy, facilitated by cheaper formats such as the penny novel and serial publication, best known in the form of Dickens' household works, which also published Elizabeth Gaskell and Wilkie Collins, and availability through circulating libraries. The English novel established itself as a key genre. Publishing fiction turned out to be a lucrative business, and the role of audience and readership is increasingly acknowledged as having played a major role in the evolution of the Victorian novel. Features of Victorian fiction. Realism was the preferred form. As earlier we have discussed two terms critically whenever we define, explain according to Plato, who has invented theory of idealism or Platonic theory. In the presence of this word or creation, he writes that the word has come from idea, and he is a staunch believer of Platonic love. What is Platonic love? That is beyond the physical love. That is the spiritual love. That is the love of soul to God, about whom Plato discusses. But his disciple Aristotle, who believes in realism, against him, he is totally opposite to him, and he claims for the realism in the world. He says that whatsoever we have around us, that is the result of our imitation. Realism was the preferred form. Second feature is predominantly concerned with social issues. Third is the three-decker multi-volume novel was popular. Many genres evolved. The mystery thriller became extremely popular with Wilkie Collins. The industrial novel was a genre that emerged during this time. Especially industrial novels were being written there at that time because of the social or political or economic conditions of that time. Middle class people, lower class people of that society were totally influenced by the spreading of revolution in industrialization. Many novelists use the novel of manners and the novel of sentiment as models. Morals and social codes were major concerns. Social problem novels, Disraeli, Dickens and Gaskell mirrored the Victorian political scenario and were a combination of ideals like socialism, Unitarianism and Christian ethics. The characters were inevitably very individualistic. Victorian novels are an extraordinary mixture of sentiment and breathing characters. They are vehicles of ideas as well as a means of amusement. As earlier we have discussed the Victorian age, there was two different streams. It was the climax of science, and on the other hand it was the culmination of religion. But ultimately science and religion both they compromised, and they wrote their thoughts and ideas where there was no conflict between science and religion, because they were both right at their places. So we see this picture in Victorian novels. They are vehicles of ideas as well as means of amusement. The Victorian novel was used as a medium by writers of different schools of thought to represent the general criticism of life. Dissemination of science made them pragmatic and judicious, whereas dissemination of the democratic spirit led them towards socialistic and theological issues. Along with revealing the trends of romantic revival novels, they also highlighted the religious and moral issues. Thus, it can be concluded that in matter and treatment, Victorian novel was an amalgamation of various conflicting viewpoints of the Victorian age. Some of the major novelists of the Victorian age include: one is Charles Dickens, who born in 1812 and died in 1870, wrote David Copperfield. These are the autobiographical novels where there is the picture of that society who were the victim of the exploitation, physically, economically, mentally, emotionally, every way. Charles Read, who wrote 1814 to 1884, The Cloister and This is, as per the observation of this is, we find that there was also the elements of exploitation injustices. Wilkie Collins, 1874 to 1889, who wrote The Woman in White, The Moonstone. Anthony Trollope, who wrote 1815 to 1882, The Warder, Dr. Thorne. Elizabethan Gaskell, 1810 to 1865, Mary Barton, North and South. George Eliot, 1819 to 1880, Adam Beatty, Mill on the Floss. These were the important writings of George Eliot of 19th century period in the Victorian age, where there he shows the pollutants of the mind that created a harshful situation for the chief character of this novel. William Makepeace Thackeray, 1811 to 1863, who wrote Vanity Fair. George Meredith, 1828 to 1909, The Shaving of Shagbet Farina. Thomas Hardy, 1842. We study Far from the Wedding Crowd. Thomas Hardy, who born in the end of the 19th century period and revolutionarily and visionarily worked in 20th century period for in the stream of consciousness technique. Through the stream of consciousness technique, we study when the time is equal, place is different, place is equal, time is different. A man who is physically present but in somewhere, this thing is presented in each of the characters of stream of consciousness. Virginia Woolf, these are the chief prominent characters of the present age of stream of consciousness technique, who use abundantly theory of impersonality, individual talent, traditional and conventional talent. These were the milestone and landmark in the history of English literature. Next is their Victorian prose. What is the difference between novel and drama? Simply we have defined novel is a writing where there is not the need of any stage. It doesn't need any external stage, but performers perform only in their minds, imaginatively. That is called novel. Prose means regular writings, unrelenting writings. That is the form of prose. We read in the form of short stories, novels, dramas, all kind of writings we contain in prose. How this prose was different and what kind of prose it was. One kind that is non-fiction and second one is fiction kind of. With the reason of Queen Victoria, when Queen Victoria came at the throne in 1837, the literary history of England flourished because she provided freedom everyone to write, to appreciate the rulers of that time. There was a larger reading public created during this period with circulation, libraries, newspapers and novels. As we read that there was the invention of the press. So due to the invention of the press, there was the publication commonly being used in the form of newspapers, magazines and novels. laymen, gentlemen, everyone was interested for reading such kind of writings. Circulating libraries created a demand for three-decker novels and many writers produced serialized fictions. The theatres remained popular and places like Covent Gardens and Drury Lane saw a change in their audience as more members of the middle class began to frequent the playhouses. Undertone of social criticism and discontentment with concurrent ideas were lurking not only in poetic works but also evident in novels and critical works. What is non-fiction writing in Victorian prose? What are the features of non-fiction? One is sermonic essays or discourses on social, political and environmental issues. As we read the Holy Bible, the Holy Scripture of the Christians, through that we listen words and thoughts of the Lord our God in praise of the Lord. Numberless changes we happen to listen. Second is historical writings. Next is belligerent writings on industrial issues like problems of the working class. Working class means lower class people, those who were become the victim of exploitation, slavery, injustices, imbalances, tribulations. Next is critical works on art and architecture. Everyone was free to write anything. Under it, art and architecture. These were the two subjects that were from the scientific point of view. The art of essay writing, which was subjective in the Romantic period. It was very common in Romantic period. Romantic period we studied English literature from 1798 to 1807. And in this time, the writing of the essays was based upon subjectivity, not objectivity. Metamorphosed itself into social criticism during the Victorian times. Instead of writing about their personal experiences, the essayists focused on depiction of contemporary social, religious, economic, political and educational conditions. So this is the identity of this time. During this time, everyone was interested in writing of the society, economy, politics, but not individuality. As William Wordsworth has presented in his poems that there was the result of social writing that brought revolution in France in 1789. So this age was emphasized to write about the society again. But this was the time in between 1789 to 1837 where there was the writing only in praise, admiration of the nature. Thomas Carlyle, Henry Newman, John Stuart Mill were among the few essayists. These were the important writers, those who praised, not only praised, critically analyzed society, who Thomas Carlyle, Henry Newman, John Stuart Mill, who penned down the incisive commentaries and analysis of Victorian society. John who is John Henry Newman, a prominent writer and a reviewist, was popular for his revolutionary views. How It is being said here revolutionary and visionary because of the revolution in industrialization. Oxford movement initiated by him. His major work was Tracts for the Times. Thomas Carlyle, who born in 1795 and died in 1881, is perhaps the most influential essayist of this time. The most influential essayist. Crucial essayist. A prolific writer. Carlyle set the agenda for rethinking issues ranging from the French Revolution to science and education. His Signs of the Times went on to influence a whole generation of thinkers and writers. Another important text and a book that revolutionized human thought was Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species. This was very important creation by Darwin. Who has not heard about this scientist? Darwin also invented about the species. He wrote numberless ideas in the category of the birds and their ecological system. Darwin, who born in 1809 and died in 1882, argued that life evolved a process of natural selection. John Stuart Mill, who born in 1806 and died in 1873, was one of the first men to speak on and advocate women's rights, especially for appealing the women's rights, he wrote. That's why it is being said here, one of the first men to speak on, who born in 1806, died in 1873. At that time, it was the tragic condition not only of the women but also of the children. As of our Indian writer who has written Guide, Jayant Mahapatra, Mulk Raj Anand, who has presented important writings by the Southern novelists that they have written for the advocacy for appealing women and children. In his famous On Liberty, he argued in favor of individual freedom. Matthew Arnold, who born in 1822 and died in 1888, which poem we have studied in the Victorian age from Matthew Arnold, that is Door Beach. Door Beach, which is the symbol of bridge, and bridge symbolically we read in the form of the collaboration and compromission between the two passages. So likely that Matthew Arnold scientifically presented the title Door Beach through his poem in Victorian age, began his career as a best but turned to prose in his later years. Arnold's criticism probably inaugurated what is now called cultural criticism. His Culture and Anarchy was a masterpiece, a defense of literature. John Ruskin, 1819 to 1900, wrote on subjects as diverse as geology and art, with modern painters being his most famous track. Walter Pater, born in 1839, died in 1894, just like Ruskin, saw his age as decadent. However, unlike Ruskin, he turned to the Renaissance for inspiration. This Renaissance that was started in 14th, 15th, 16th century, not only in European countries but all over the world, is read in the form of the Elizabethan age. William Shakespeare, Edmund Spenser, Francis Bacon, These were the literary giants of the Elizabethan age. Likely them, this was also the return to the Renaissance for inspiration. Everyone's writings were being inspired, motivated, encouraged to do something better, nicer and finer for the society. Which the studies in the history of the Renaissance in 1873 and appreciation in 1889 were attempts to recast aesthetic and were instrumental in the forging of the pre-Raphaelites and the aesthetic movement. Next we will read fiction. In the history of the non-fiction, we have read important essayists were John Henry Newman, Thomas Carlyle, Matthew Arnold, Darwin, Henry Newman, John Stuart Mill. What is fiction? The term Victorian novel does not confine itself to a particular thought, with a set of novelists pondering over common themes. Instead, it gives us a panoramic view of the life of the time. It is a social document of great value and significance. In its variety of matter and content, the Victorian novel is the index of the many-sided interests and conflicting elements of the Victorian age. As we read in the history of our nation, our India is known as the multiculturalistic country because of its unity and diversity, because of its varieties, adversities, diversities. The similar feature we read in the Victorian age. This was the age full of varieties. We have novels of the sea and of military life, political life, middle class life and so on. Sometimes these novels go beyond British geographic locations, as in the fiction which is concerned with Irish life or Scottish life, or even about life in other European countries. Being a student of literature, we know this thing that literature is the mirror of our society, and we see the glimpses of the different nations in the mirror of literature. So likely that everyone's thoughts and ideas can be read through the literature, whether we are not having the presence of that particular place. In spite of that, we can understand the political, economical, social, personal, professional, public situations, conditions of that place. It happens usually, and it happened also in Victorian age. Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870, became a household name. Then Pickwick Papers was published in 1837. When his Pickwick Papers was published? In 1837. And in English literature we study this was the time of the assigning of the Queen Victoria, 1837. At the same time, Charles Dickens wrote Pickwick Papers. Charles Dickens, who born in 1812 and died in 1870. His irresistible humor combined with his elaborate descriptive power and his astonishing vitality of his characters made him popular. His other works include A Tale of Two Critics, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, and Our Mutual Friend. In the Great Expectations, you will read that unexpectedly everyone was working. Even a common man, layman, general man of the society was working in the industries. in their factories, but they have expectations. Without expectations, how could they work? But they worked on under exploitation. William Makepeace Thackeray, 1811 to 1863, was essentially a social satirist. Both the qualities he had in his character, one is a social satirist and a realist. Realist like George Bernard Shaw, who has written Arms and the Man. Satirist like John Dryden, who has written Rape of the Law. His popular works are Vanity Fair and The History of Henry Esmond. The novel was thus humanitarian in the hands of Dickens and satiric in the hands of Thackeray. Humanitarian in the hands of Dickens. How? Because Charles Dickens presented the picture of the children or women, those who were being exploited in the society. That's why this novel is known as the humanitarian novel, which was written by whom? Charles Dickens. Second one, in the satirical form, Thackeray presented this picture. In the hands of Mary Ann Evans or Marian Evans, known by her pen name George Eliot. These were two sisters, Mary Ann Evans and Marian Evans, known by the pen name George Eliot, who born in 1819 to 1880. It became moral and philosophical. This was also the recordable writing of the Victorian age. What is the name of that writing? Mill on the Floss. In her novel Romola, a tale of the Renaissance Florence, she made an excursion into the past. However, she was her best works in Adam Bailey, Adam that captured from the Holy Bible, and that is being presented, a tale of the Renaissance Florence. She made an excursion into the past. Adam Beatty, The Mill on the Floss, Silas Marner and Middlemarch. Another influential novelist is Thomas Hardy. Time and again we have appreciated this personality of the modern literature, who born in Victorian age but presented modern age by writing The Wasteland. Who has written The Wasteland? T.S. Eliot. Which poem T.S. Eliot has presented? Blue Frogs. Love of the Blue Frogs. Thomas Hardy presented Far from the Madding Crowd. Driven by a famously tragic vision in The Return of the Native, the Mayor of Castle Beach, The Woodlanders and Jude the Obscure. Hardy is a writer of the rather gloomy, tragic novels. Wilkie Collins, 1824 to 1889, was a popular novelist who tried to cater to the taste of Victorian public at a time when it was fed up with the social reform and propaganda novels. His prominent works are The Woman in White and The Moonstone. Anthony Trollope, 1875 to 1882, is the novelist of the middle and the upper middle classes. What kind of writing Anthony Trollope wrote in the Victorian age? The middle and the upper middle classes. Means aristocratic families, royal families. In such of the characters he wrote abundantly. With urbane familiarity and shrewd observation, he presents an accurate, detailed picture of their quiet and uneventful lives. His important works include The Warden, The Barchester Towers and Dr. Thorne, Love Peacocks, 1785 to 1866, works of a comic dramatization of the intellectual notions of his age, heading Headlong Hall, Nightmare Abbey and Crochet Castle are among his popular novels. These are the important novels that we read to the royalty, aristocracy of the people. The Victorian age is also a time when women novelists began to carve out a place for themselves. Elizabethan, Gaskell, the Bronte sisters, and George Eliot are some of the most significant women writers of this time. Elizabeth Gaskell's 1870 to 65 novels revolved around the themes of improvement of working conditions of laborers and workers in factories and industries, thus making her novels a major tool in bringing social reform like North and South and Mary Barton, Charlotte Bronte, Emily and Anne Bronte made notable contribution to the English novel during the early part of the Victorian era. Their chief novels are the following. Charlotte Bronte's novel is Jane Eyre or Villette. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey. The three sisters represent the stormy sisterhood, that is, the passion in English fiction. They imparted the romantic note of imagination and passion to English novel. Though in 1880s, adventure, fantasy and mystery novels were quite popular, most of the novelists still confined themselves to realistic themes. So these are the important writings that were done in Victorian age and we have read them. Further, we will discuss modern age later on. Thank you. Thank you, dear students.